Let us create land out of this substance and living creatures, and let us make the land productive, that it may bear fruit for the subsistence of the creatures that we shall create. Let us choose, therefore, the directions where each shall begin. So Lone Man chose the northern part, and the first creator the southern, and they left a space between in the water, which is the Missouri River. Then, after agreeing to compare results, they began the creation. The Lone Man and the first creator divided up the land and put the Missouri River in the middle, so it serves as a sort of a dividing line. And each took a portion of the land to create. And subsequently, it even, I think, first creator says that he doesn't know where he came from, who his parents were, but he thought that he had come from the water. So it shows that our origins is one of our creation heroes has his genesis in the water. So yeah, his figure is very majorly, it's a major part of our spiritual existence. It's been attributed as a huge snake that was one of our culture heroes at one time, was a human, but somehow had turned into a snake, evolved into a snake because of his actions, and was put in the water by his brother. And it said that his tail, I think, is up by the Yellowstone, and that his head is down by the Grand River or something like that. So it encompasses the entire lake. But the Missouri River is our grandfather, so an elder, so we consider it a relative in that sense, in that spiritual sense. So
the Awati, or the river, was considered to be like the lifeline of the Indian people. It provided, just so much in terms of their preservation, in terms of their existence. And I think that, not only did it provide the water to drink, to sustain the people, but it provided, the willows, the cottonwoods, the shrubbery, the native bushes that grew along the river that provided the berries and stuff. We could go down to the river. We called it an area that where we would go quite often, and we would go there to get wood for our fires in the fall. We would go there to get fence posts for our fences. We would go there to get corral posts for our corrals. We would go there to get pick chokecherries, juneberries, plums, grapes. All of that grew along the Awati, or the river. And that is why over at Indian Health Service today, they do call their wellness center the Awati Wellness Center, and it's in honor of the river and all that it has done for the existence of the three affiliated tribes. And I think it's a very appropriate name.
Beginning in 1930, a bridge over the Missouri River was designed and planned by the North Dakota State Highway Commission. The location chosen for this bridge was Elbowoods on the Fort Berthold Reservation. Construction was completed in 1934. I was born in Watford City, 50 miles west of here, and grew up in this area from about the 5th grade on. My great-grandfather settled in the Williams County area just north of here, about 35 miles, a place called what's now called Hoffland Bay, but the bottomlands were lush, and you can see it in the last 70 miles stretch south of the bridge that there is, is a rich bottomland, and obviously there were some plants there that probably those are that is probably the only ecosystem that they could be maintained in. I always thought that North Dakota had a unique climate in that sense. We sometimes have harsh winters and short summers, but I tell you, I don't mind that when I think about the, like tornadoes down south that are in that more humid climate. Our culture was built around the Missouri River in the earth lodges that were set up along its banks, just above the floodplain, I believe. And nowadays, culturally, we have a big bridge going across it, so our access point has always been the Elbowoods Bridge, and in Newtown, this new bridge that we have now, but even before then, Sanish had a bridge, Rendry Bridge. So yeah, we've always been village people, and we've always lived along this Missouri. So spiritually, before the dam, it was obviously a source of water, and as such, it was a necessary ingredient. And if you'll notice, or I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Missouri River and its tributaries that fed into it were our major highways. There are some roads that went, or some trails that maybe it went across the prairie, the major prairies of North Dakota, but I think there were few and far between, and there was a network, I'm sure. Little Missouri was another one. And spiritually, they held a major role. The Missouri River held a major role in our creation stories, which I shared with you.
I guess the thing about places like Independence and Lucky Mont was that people were really self-sufficient in those days. Took care of their own things. Some of the things I remember about Independence was coming up to, or in the wintertime, we didn't really go to Elbowoods. Going to town was a long ways. The only way to get there, and especially in the wintertime, was by horseback or by wagon and sleigh. We didn't have cars, especially cars that were running in the wintertime. So we went back and forth, and occasionally I remember that someone would go to town and they would ask us if we wanted something from town, and usually we would put some, my folks would make out a list. My father was living up on our ranch up about, 8 miles or 10 miles from Independence, and my mother and I lived at the old Wolf Chief place that was above the hill, on top of the hill there. That, in my experience in my life, and I spent 12 years in Alaska, living at the Wolf Chief house had to be the coldest experience I ever had in my life. I can't remember a morning when everything wasn't frozen when we woke up in the morning, but that was a frame house that really wasn't very well insulated. And so, first of all, the fact that we lived in earth lodges, and that were really pretty toasty warm. And then after that, we built these nice, really, and most of you probably remember, these old log houses, were really warm. Sometimes you could cook, you fill your cook stove up full of wood, and it practically drag you out of the house because it got so warm in there. So, but living in that Wolf Chief house was, I say, was one of the coldest. But if we had to get something, usually we'd put some money and a list of things we wanted in a gunny sack and give it to that person, and we'd ride to Elbowoods and get the mail and buy whatever we needed to buy and bring it back. And I remember that especially because, when I was in the 4th grade, candy and those kind of things were still pretty special to me. And so I remember people, that this person riding back and running after him so I could get our gunny sack with all the little goodies in it. So that's kind of some of my early remembrances of the bridge. And it was, I thought it was, from things I've read and things I've studied and things I've heard from listening to different people, that was a pretty good time in our life. We had been moved from like a fish hook. Some of us went over to Fort Buford. They brought us all back and forced us to live on the Fort Berthold Reservation. And the three tribes were very industrious people and were also very self-sufficient. And so we immediately continued to live our village lifestyle. We lived close together, and I guess one of my memories of living in Independence is one morning going to school, and there used to be a group of houses where everybody had livestock in those days. They had some cattle, they had some horses, and cleaning the barn and keeping these animals was really a chore that everybody took very seriously. So I remember one morning walking to school. In this wintertime, the snow was cold, and you crunch, crunch, crunch as you're walking along. And I remember somebody started singing a song. Remember those days when it was really cold and the still day that the smoke from these log houses went straight up. And that was one of those mornings. And I remember somebody was singing. And as he was singing, somebody else joined him, just like they were at a drum or something. And I remember there must have been a couple other folks that were out, and there were probably about 4 guys that were probably cleaning barn or doing something outside, and they all started to sing.
The Elbowoods Bridge was the only bridge on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. The bridge was actually on the North Dakota State Highway number 8. And North Dakota Highway number 8 is still in existence. If you traveled south of Parshall on North Dakota State Highway 8, and then if you went as far as you could before it made a turn, if you had the highway kept going, you would have ended up in Elbowoods. Of course, it's underwater now. But the bridge was constructed in 1934, 2 years before I was born. So I suppose I first crossed it shortly after I was born with my parents in some, either in probably a pickup or a vehicle of some sort. But as we grew older and were able to travel on our own, we all rode horses, so we would cross it quite often in the summer on horseback. Usually at that point it was just kids out playing. We were never really sent on any particular mission or task to go across the river. It usually occurred as, let's get on our horses and let's ride around. We lived fairly close to the bridge, probably within 2 miles. So it was easily accessible to us, and it was, like I say, a very adventuresome trip to cross that bridge. Well, there was very little, like I say, vehicle traffic at that time, and if there was a vehicle coming, you could always get off your horse and hold on to your horse while the vehicle passed. The Missouri River was pretty, not treacherous, but unpredictable. So the kids didn't really swim in the river itself. You could be there one day and it would be a sandbar, and you'd go the next day and there would be a cut bank, so you couldn't fish from the bridge. The bridge was too high. But as you crossed the bridge, you could look down and sometimes see people fishing on the banks. Well, before the dam, it was a very, a much different type of life than today. Of course, the technology and natural evolution of technology and stuff. But we lived in pretty much an agricultural community, farming and ranching. So there was a lot of cattle raising. We had to do a lot of herding of cattle and taking care of gardens. So it was a much simpler life, probably built mostly around hard work, producing enough garden produce to sustain yourself over the winter. And so while it was a relatively simple life in terms of not having a lot to do with the outside world, it was still a pretty harsh life based upon hard work. You had to, like I say, the summers were spent a lot in farming and ranching. So they seemed like there was always work to do. One of the things that we became aware of was that Nelson, who was the general foreman for the building of the Four Bears Bridge in Elbowoods, today they would call him a superintendent, but in those years he was the general foreman. And at the time of the completion and during the dedication of the Four Bears Bridge. He was given a gift by the Indian people. But I think what's really interesting is that after he left Elbowoods, he moved on to another construction job in 1935 and 36, and it was a Fort Peck Dam, which is also on the Missouri River in Montana. And he helped with that construction, and his photograph appeared on the very first issue of the Life magazine. I have here in these little tiny figures at the bottom is Nelson. Okay, this photo was taken by Margaret Bork White. She was also became very famous because she was the first female war correspondent during World War II.
So we had probably the first non-paying, of course, bed and breakfast on the reservation, because people used to come from Independence, come across the river in a rowboat, and then stay at our place overnight, and then go on to Elbowoods or wherever they were going. And then, conversely, when they were coming back, they usually would spend the night and go on. So I remember a house full of people all the time, and I remember my grandma and my mom were cooking constantly. And started out going to school at Lucky Mount, a little day school out there. Went there for 2 years. And then the Garrison Dam started to, it was pretty obvious that the Garrison Dam was going to be built. And my grandmother had died when I guess I was about 6. And so they kind of decided at that point that they would move out to West Segment area. And so we moved out to an area called Hart Butte, which is about 15 or 20 miles east of Mandaree. We were really literally out in the middle of nowhere, because there was really no one there. Our nearest neighbor, I think, was about 5 miles away. It was a bachelor rancher by the name of Red O'Neill. And in those days, there was open range. People, your visitors usually came in on horseback, sometimes by wagon, but most of the time they were horseback. In those days, you go riding out and you stop at somebody's house, and you never lock your door. So if there was, if they needed to eat or whatever, they would fix food and kind of leave a note there saying that we were here, and reciprocal kind of things. We had this big community garden that everybody had a plot in, and they used to, but people used to come from Elbowoods, and come put a garden there, and they would use our team, because in those days everything was done pretty much by a horse. One horse walking plow. I remember probably more about the span in the middle of the bridge, the old Elbowoods Bridge. My early recollections of the Newtown Bridge were, the Sanish Rodeo, and seeing that, it was way up, and they were building it. This massive thing up in the air. In those days, they didn't have the powwows like they have today, and so that was really our big get-together. And usually, a lot of people had cattle and stuff, and so, right after July 4th, we started haying, and so that was kind of a vacation. People would usually go, there'd be literally caravans of wagons. People would come to Sanish in a wagon and a team, and would camp. A lot of the folks had these white canvas camps, canvas tents, wall tents, and they're used a lot by guides and backpackers and those kind of things. Most people had those, and so it was almost like a community of white tents. They'd all come in. And we'd all camp there, and then people would, on the way, usually, we'd stop, because we'd go to a bear den coming from Independence, and there was excellent hunting in the bear den area, so we'd stop and probably get a deer or two, and make some dry meat and come on up, and that's and then the men usually would, like my dad and those kind of guys would usually work, and work with, maybe help out with a stock contractor or whoever, and make a couple of bucks a day. For $1, you could have one heck of a time at it. And so we had to cut the buckbrush in. And so every night after work, our recreation was to get the axe out and go in there and cut that damn buckbrush. And you had to cut it below the ground, because you had to pull the roots out. And so that was our recreation. A lot of times on Sundays, for instance, we ran a bunch of horses. And so on Sundays, for recreation, we'd bring the mares in, and holler break some horses, do whatever, catch the mares, and carry them up and that kind of thing. So that was our Sunday recreation. That was our recreation. You usually end up getting bucked off a horse or something on Sunday afternoon for excitement.
I was born in Elbowoods, North Dakota, which is kind of where they're talking about the bridge, where at least the Elbowoods Bridge. They moved it now, and they call it the Four Bears Bridge. I guess we can call it Elbowoods Bridge or Four Bears Bridge. The church is very important because there was a lot of travel across back and forth by the priests, by the workers in the church, going and coming. The Catholic Church and the Congregational Church was very important to the Indian people because it was how we got together, how we interacted with each other. We have, of course, had the religious beliefs, so it was really a spiritual, I guess you call it a spiritual way of seeing life, gathering together, eating together. We had conferences, and so there'd be a lot of times people from the reservation would always come to Elbowoods. So of course they came either by car and a lot of times by wagon. So they'd had to come across the bridge when they come across, we'd say across the river. And from Independence, Twin Buttes, Beaver Creek, what is another place? Red Butte, different areas. And then we'd camp. They would have I know we'd have a conference every year, which was a big thing at the Catholic Church. And people could come from all the reservation. They'd have horses, and they'd have tents, and there'd be rations given out, and then they'd have movies outside by the church with a screen. They talk about Elbowoods. There's a big valley, maybe about, and then Lucky Mound was up this way, so I just traveled along. But on this side of the river, you had hills and high cliffs. So just a whole different kind of a river. The south side would be the cliffs and the big hills, but on our side, it was just first you'd have a lot of woods in there, and then nice farmland, beautiful farmland. If I recall, when I look back, it was especially with our gardens, black dirt. Good black dirt. So the things like that. And the gardens we always had good gardens, and the soil must have been a lot to do with as much as the rain. Up on the prairies now, you got to water. You got to water, or anywhere else. As you're going across south, and we'd always go across the bridge, then you could follow the road around and go up, and they call it the Four Bears Hill, and it kind of wound along the road, and then as you got to the top, when you hit the prairies on that side, or where they got flat, it was high, then place Crow's Breast, they had their ranch, and they always had a 3-day rodeo there in July. Van Hook had a rodeo, but Sanish also had a rodeo. Yeah. And there was a Sanish bridge there at the same time, and we would go to the Sanish rodeo, sometimes on horseback, which was a long ride because we'd have to ride all through the reservation, and go across the bridge there, and the Sanish rodeo was the same thing. And I think that was later in the year. It would have been late July, because Crow's Breast, I'm almost certain, was during the 4th of July. So because I remember one thing, that as we crossed the bridge and cut through the hills there, the June bears are all right. Okay. And we would eat June berries to our full going through there, and there's June berries all over. And so the 1st of July, as I said, was when the June berries got good and ripe. And I think the Sanish rodeo would have been in August, maybe the 1st of August, or maybe the end of July, it could be too. But that was a big rodeo too, the same thing. And then people camped, and we rode horseback over there. Then we stay there at the rodeo, and they had hay for the animals, and some of the riders and everybody, we just sleep in the haystack. Well, that's right into the rodeo ground. They'd have nice hay, and so we just sort of lived there, and had a carnival going on. So we would ride mountain money, they call it, and have a little money on the side. You would get $1. When you're riding in the rodeo, it wasn't fast like it now. Sometimes they'd have a holdup from the chutes, and then they always had this chute with a cow in it, or a steer we called it, and we'd say, "Hey, we want somebody to ride." So if you run over there real quick, you could get on the steer, and they'd turn you loose just to keep the, and then they give you a little slip of paper after the rodeo. You'd go somewhere and they'd give you $1. That was big money then, and or if you could rode 2 of them, then you get $2. We were young, and the bridge was a fascinating place to us because it was
the only structure like it, you know, steel structure, and places to climb, and we'd try to climb up the edge of the trestles. You know, we had to be careful because if some adults would come by, it was a dangerous place. And I know our parents would always just say, stay away from that bridge. I know we went there. And I know they hated us swimming in the river, but we'd swim. And, but we would ride over on horseback and just play around the bridge, you know, to climb underneath it. And it was a dangerous, I actually look back, darn, that was dangerous because we could have fallen, you know, because there was, and it was, the wind would blow underneath it, but it was kind of the daredevil things too. But then we'd also try to climb up the, you know, along the, where the bridge comes down there, you could, pretty steep, we'd see how far we could climb up. My dad had about maybe 40 head of horses. It must have been from the old school where the people had a lot of horses, and so we call that kind of wild horses that just ran. And we'd round them up once a year, brand them, and then turn them loose, and they just ran on the hills, you know, ran up in the prairies. And but I remember going across there and then them hills once and rounding up horses for some reason. And that was kind of hard doing because over on our side we had prairie and a valley. But if you went further east, you'd have kind of the breaks again. But the horses all ran in it was more easier to round up. When we was over there, it was the horses would ran in some of the rougher country. But so we had horse roundups over there. You know, I never brought them across the bridge, but my brother said sometimes he remembers taking horses across the bridge. That was later on when they were rounding up horses to sell. When the dam, that was part of the dam. When the dam come, there was a lot of horses, so they had to get rid of them. Elbowoods was a central. It was the agency. But also we had a big white building, which was the office building, the agency. We called that the agency. And the reason, then we had the Indian agent, if you use in the word, we call it superintendent, was changing, and then like say Beitzel or some other name, he would call it Indian agent. So they still had the Indian agent, like all kind of agents, the agency went up. So it was so all business would have to come to Elbowoods. They had phones, but anything, and the hospitals were there, schools were there, the big school. They had outlying school districts, but the main school. So I've known the bridge a long time now. That's how since all my life. Because I remember as a kid, my dad had an old pickup, and we'd lay in the back of the pickup when we went across the bridge, and they got these, you can see where the girders kind of went across, and it was really fascinating. We'd lay on our back, and you'd see these, it was like a kaleidoscope or something. Okay, one thing I remember, is what they used to call the June rays. It was in June the river would rise, and I don't think that happens anymore. But it was when the water was melting in, say, April. Of course, they got dams and all that along there now, and irrigation. But when the water would get real high, about the 1st of June, and really come roaring down, and actually they were high cliffs, and they would be once in a while. One of them, it would sort of, the piece would fall, and you could hear it. You know, could hear it at night when he was at our house. You could hear a crash. Different places they had roads across the ice, and when it froze, the river would freeze solid. And we lived about a mile on the other side of Elbowoods. We'd come in, and we'd come down through the woods and then down over the banks, and then you get into the onto the ice, and there'd be.
We lived in the valley, sort of like Beaver Creek Valley down here, and Dad owned some land there, and we lived there in the 30s. And my dad, well, he did that pretty all his life. When he lived up there on the reservation, he mined coal in the 30s and traded it for oats and for chickens to eat, and there was no crops, you know. Mm-hmm. And he did that, and then we moved here, and we mined coal here for quite a few years. Yeah, we took, one winter we hauled 125 ton of coal across the ice across the Missouri. And that's just about straight north of the farm here now. Well, to go to Nisha around was a 100-mile trip just about. You know, you had to go clear up to where Elbowoods Bridge was and then come back down. And Nisha was just Oh, it was just about straight north of Beulah Bay. You could see it from the hilltop here, the schoolhouse and stuff. So that was 11 miles over there from here. No, we put it in the government school there, Nisha School. And then we hauled some across to private individuals in the wintertime on the ice. We hauled 10 ton a day all winter. It was a lot of hard work because you drill the holes by hand, blast the coal, and then split it up and load it up. Over there, Dad would throw it down, and I was in the basement. It was only about 100 degrees or more. They had hot water heat, and oh my goodness, that was so hot, putting the coal back. You know, to get it all in, they wanted it in before, we hauled during the winter because they burned a lot. They burned, must have burned 5 ton a day. Yeah, we hauled quite a few loads up the Elbowoods, and then we'd go across that bridge. It was a nice, good bridge, a little narrow, but then when the days they made it, there was just T's and Model A's and team and buggies, you know. It didn't have to be very wide. But afterwards, with the 2 trucks, it was a little narrow. So when we used to haul coal across the ice, I always told my dad it's sinking. We're always going uphill. He didn't think so, and if we had a real cold night, say 30, 40 below, the next morning you got on there, that would rip and crack. Oh man, that ice would crack. I bet you could hear it for miles. Yeah, I could hear, in the wintertime, like now when the sun comes out, you could hear it rip from here, crack. And then when the big ice chunks come down, you could hear kaboom. When they'd hit, you go up on the hill and look with a binocular. Some of them, I bet you were standing 20 feet in the air before they finally went down. Man, that made a bang. It's all quiet now. Yeah. There would be farmers from this side farmed a lot of land over there. And then on the weekends they'd come home and stuff, and then there was always somebody driving across, it seemed like. See, the high water would be up and them big chunks would hit them piers, and the guy would shut his eyes thinking the bridge is going to go, but it never moved. And then it would be high. I mean, sometimes on the north side it would flood. A.J. Rapp was on the north side. Mm-hmm. After you cross it a ways, and then you hit his store, and there was also Martin Trice had a garage there. He worked on cars, and then you kind of went on over and hit Elbowoods. Yeah, it was like a little town. All the government offices were there, hospital. Well, I knew the whole thing by heart, you know, before water. It sure moved everybody out of here. I mean, in my book, they really didn't. I never realized that till years later, after I got older. That really upset the Native Americans. You know, they had their places where they lived at, these schools, you know, the kids could go to school. Mm-hmm. And then they had the river bottom, they could always have wood and got water from there and stuff. Then when that flooded, they put houses up on the hilltops with electric heat in them, and nobody could afford to warm them up. On the south side, starting right from here and going up, there wasn't much farmland until you got way up past the Elbowoods Bridge and stuff. Then you'd start hitting some flats up there around Shell Creek and Independence and Charging Eagle. Them were all settlements up there. And then you'd hit some. It wasn't quite as rough. But on the north side here, there was on the north side of the lake, there was lots of farmland. Well, even on the south side, if you go to the east, from the dam up, there was section after section that was just as level as a board. Yeah, and there was a lot of good farmland there. I can see the whole thing yet. A lot of it growed into weeds. Let's see, this was about 1934. Dad farmed some land, well, it was just north of where we lived on the river bottom. It belonged to Jim Holden Eagle was his name. And Dad farmed it. I think there was 21 acres there. It was used to be an old riverbed, you know. And for some reason, that stuff got, it got terrible high, you know, and there wasn't a thing in the head, not a kernel. And I don't know what happened at that time. Now I suppose we'd say it rusted or something happened, but at that time that wasn't known as much. But Jim Holden Eagle was a good man, and Dad had to pay him a share. So how do you give a fourth share of nothing? You know, he could have cut it and thrashed it and there wouldn't have been nothing. So he said, I'll make you a deal. He says, you chase your horses in there and we'll just call it even. So, okay, and I was down there when they opened the gate and chased the horses in, and the big horses, you could see them, but when them little ones disappeared, I got wild, boy. I was afraid them little horses were going to get lost.
Yeah.
The colts, it was higher than they were, you know, and I didn't see them.
Huh.
And they all laughed at me. Said, they'll be coming out, don't worry. But I really was hollering. They were losing them little horses. Well, I don't know if they ate much or not, you know.
Born on my dad's ranch on the Little Missouri River 72 years ago. I remember the chicken plan that I got from my prairie chicken plan that I got from my mother's plan. And, son of a go-cat, which I from my dad. That's been handed down as our culture has, and things down, so that's how it turns out. Alex, I just want to say something about the bridge here a little bit before I get into other things. You know, this last spring, or last winter, late winter, short spring, the water, that peak over there on the other side, on number 8, it showed poked through the ice, and poked through just like a spear. Well, at that time, this guy was asking me about, how did your people feel about the bridge? Were they glad to have it? And I said, yeah, they were very glad to have it. I said, you can see by these pictures here, they celebrated for 4 days. And there was a lot of our people that I still knew, that were in that picture. While they were celebrating there, showing it for the first time to our people. And that guy wanted me to get way up on a hill there on the east side. He said, I want you to tell me about what that bridge meant to your people. So we went up in a 4-wheel drive and went way on top of the east side there. And he was holding the mic to me and I was talking to him about the bridge. I said, we tied all our people together. I said, we had about equal amounts of communities on each side of the bridge. Come around from Independence across the Little River, which wasn't as big as the Big River. And the people usually cross it either with a horse and buggy, or sometimes they cross it with their pickups or cars. They just simply stopped and took the fan belt off and then crossed it. So spin water and fill the engine. And then they come around and cross the bridge there. So we was communicating from the north and the south side segments. And of course we had, at that time, we had Elbowoods. Elbowoods was the center of our people. And we all we went to school there, and the buses, I rode across that bridge every day going to school. And in later years, I got to cross again on saddle horse when I went to dances and so forth. I just want to kind of mention a little, I didn't got much time here, so I want to mention the fact that, you know, my parents always told me, and not only told me, but they carried it out themselves. They told me to respect the land, the water, and the air, and things that give everything a living. It was, help things grow. So the rest of us can, you know, eat well.
When I was growing up, our family would live with Grandpa and Grandma Price. Then we moved to stay with Grandma Little Sue Malnori in Nishu, and we went back and forth until my dad was employed as a power plant operator for the community of Elbowoods. I was 1 year old in 1932 when the Forebears Bridge was built. I remember our first home. It was a log house, and my dad, and he, along with his brother Pat Malnori, built that log house for us. And when we planted big gardens, we had real gardens. We raised corn, squash, cucumbers, onions. My mom used to plant lettuce for us. And our job, my brother and sister's jobs, was keeping that garden weeded. Oh, we used to have so much fun weeding in the garden there. And I remember my brother especially, you all know him, Donald Budsy Malnori. He was just lazy sometimes, and he just wouldn't do his share of weeding, and we used to have big dirt fights out in that field there, and to this day we sit and we talk about all of that, the jobs that we had in weeding. I remember the floods. Every spring, I shouldn't say we looked forward to those floods, but here they would come. We rode our horses across that Forebears Bridge. I remember we had so much fun riding our horses. Camping at the fairgrounds in old Elbowoods meant brought back a lot of memories for us. We picked corn, we picked bullberries, choke cherries with my Grandma Price. She used to have this big canvas out there, and our job was to get these big sticks, and we'd have to knock all those berries out, and then we'd gather them all up, and that's what she made. Some jelly and things for us. I think the most memorable, sad memory that I have is when we moved out of Elbowoods and we had to make room. We relocated and made room for the big Garrison Dam that came. Our family grew up and began all their different lives, and they took their careers. I have so many happy memories, and sad ones too, of the Elbowoods days then and now. My brother and uncle went to the spirit world due to an auto accident on the east end of the Four Bears Bridge. And you know, every time I would drive across the bridge, I would remember them. Now, my brother, Donald Budsy Malnori, and I perhaps can begin and bring some closure to this sad memory for us.
Well, I was growing up in Shell Creek. Shell Creek, right along the creek there, was just very few of us. I would say about good, maybe, look at about 7 families that live along that creek. At that time, when living along in Shell Creek there, where I live, and Hawk Creek, we were called Koshka District. While living there, we had everything. We had a good soil, lived right along the timberline of Missouri River. Anything you put in the ground will grow because the soil was really good. Where we lived there, I went to day school. That school was right along Hawk Creek. And they called it Shell Creek. Now my folks were kind of cattle people there. We had livestock. Like I said, we had there was pretty much in a good shape because of grass. And at that time, they don't feed cows with green. Good green grass was what it took. So my folks had quite a few head of cows, pigs, chickens. Living in Shell Village, there, I went to school to 8th grade, then I went to high school in Elbowoods. While I was growing up, my folks were my teachers. I learned how to talk our language. Today they call it Hiradza. When I went to school in Shell Creek there's not a word that I know about English. I get hit quite a few times talking my language. But at that time, they don't let us talk our language in school. So finally, I start learning. My folks taught to us, there was 4 of us, about everything. How to live. Respect, that's one of the biggest things was respect. You gotta respect this, you gotta respect that. That's how we grew up. And at that time, my dad said 8th grade was mostly high for getting a good job. While I was in high school, he said, more likely, he said, up to 12th grade. And today, college education. Education is one of the biggest things in our lives. You learn something that you love to do, that's how you're going to live. And that's how, and I was told by my parents. Anybody that's going to school, chase that education. Have a good life.
Well, Dad homesteaded up about 16 miles north of here. And Mother's dad had a ranch about 5 miles north of town here, back in those days. And she was cooked there. She was only 14 years old when she came out here. So I guess that's where they got together. There wasn't too many girls around, not too many boys either. So anyhow, they got married. They married. Then they wound up on the homestead. We were only a mile from the reservation line. Oh yes, I farmed in the Neeshore area and around Elbowoods from the start. Well, altogether I was over there 9 years. And they took the bridge out, and I farmed, I don't know. Oh, but it was over 1,000 acres that I farmed over there. And that's where the bulk of my farming was. Over here, I didn't own any land, and just had a rent. And it's pretty hard to get land around here. Well, if you had, oh yes, you had people that you knew over there, and some of the people that, well, I know there's people that lived here, or they'd maybe, but they farmed over there. Neighbors, there's, any number of the neighbors around here farmed over there. That was open country to farm. There was level on ground, and that's what a farmer likes. We'd go down to the river bottom to pick cherries and grapes and stuff like that, and cut fence posts. We get up there, but of course when the land was bought once, core land, well, the owners could still let us cut trees for fence posts, but that was a winter job usually. And then we'd cross on ice. I used to go to rodeos, but that was further east there where the Grinnells and the Charlie Blake and them help round up horses, and they'd put them in a corral and they'd get on and ride them and just let them go right out on the prairie. Oh yeah, they'd buck and they could jump off. Or else somebody would ride after them and catch them.
You know, these, listening to the stories here, the memories that we have of Elbowoods, they're very, very precious memories. Each and every one of us have these, you know. And I remember as a little girl growing up in Elbowoods, and all these stores that they talked about. We had a hospital there, we had an agency there, we had the water plant there, and we had a sawmill. We had Dogtown, which was down the hill, where some of the people lived down there. And it was really a pretty place because that was all full with trees down there. And we had the Catholic Church, and we had the Congregational Church. There it was under Reverend Case. And I remember that we used to have a CE, that's Christian Endeavor. Certain nights of the week was on Wednesday at the church, Congregational Church. And I attended that church from the time I was small until I think when I was about 13 years old. I think about Elbowoods and all the places. It's like my dad, he liked to hunt. And he said, now I'm getting old, he said. And when I lay there, I think about all those trails in the woods where we used to go hunting. And that's the way I am now. I can think of all the people where they used to live in Elbowoods. I just about name every one of them, even down to Dogtown.
I thought it was great. We had everything. We had gardens, rich land. Well, we had cattle and horses, pigs, chickens. We had everything. Just a regular farm, I guess, and ranch. I did everything. I worked outside rather than inside. Helped my dad, and we had a lot of horses, and we each broke our own colts. And I thought it was fun. Yeah, my dad used to hunt deer. Yeah, I think they did every winter. But they used to go, you know, take a pack horse and go hunt and bring 2 or 3 back, you know. I think we played football, tag, whatever. Most of the time we were tired, I guess we went to bed and got up early, you know. But we had like Christmas plays and stuff at the school, so we had activities like that. We had to go to town, across the river. We had a store there, yeah. Oh, it was down from us. Buck's store, huh? Down from where we lived.
The store?
Buck's, yeah.
It was right close to
Yeah, it was kind of across,
Roberson's.
across the creek like. It was pretty close. They kind of had everything, I thought. And in the winter, they went across the ice and to Partial, I guess, and to Minot, but we stayed home, the kids, most of the time. It's my dad and Mom went. I think we went to Van Hook most of the time. When they needed something that the Van Hook didn't have, then they had to go to Minot. Yeah, there was a place where it wasn't really a dock, it's like a sandbar, I guess, then, when the rowboat came and got us. My aunt and uncle lived right across, so we'd cross in the rowboat, and then they'd take us to town, then come back, and then we'd cross. We paid somebody to take us across. We never took that many pictures. That's why I said Tilly probably has more pictures. They took pictures. I don't remember my folks ever having a camera back then.
We were friends from way back in our teenage days, and we lived in Newtown, in a city there, of Newtown. We were very young then at that time. When I lived in Elbowoods, I lived there till I was like 7 years old, and then we moved from there back to Shell Creek, and I went to Elbowoods School and then a Shell Creek School. And then in my 9th year, freshman year, I was sent back to Elbowoods and lived in a dormitory there. And that's when everything, that we're talking about, the flooding of the reservation there. Teenager, it was quite a life. We all lived like in a community, and at that time we used to do a lot of visiting. The parents, would go visit one another, and sometimes we didn't have transportation, and they'd walk. We'd do a lot of walking.
I never lived in Elbowoods. My parents always lived in Independence. My mother married my dad, Wilson Packenote. They lived in Independence. And then they moved back to Shell Creek. And at my grandma's, P.B. Smith, her place. And it was a happy childhood for me. And my grandma had, it was sort of, in today's ways, it was hard for her. And we had to gather wood for the winter and water, and we had to can food and grow gardens. But it was a happy childhood for me, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed life.
I married a married man during the war. I'm marrying an English girl. And when I was discharged in 1945, there were very few jobs around. I returned to college, and then when I graduated from college in 46, still too few jobs. So I thought I'd get more training, and I went into medicine, graduating from Tufts Medical School in 1950, and then I had a year of internship, a special year in the U.S. Public Health Service, because U.S. Public Health Service paid for internships, and good ones paid $15 a month. The second year, however, I was given my fifth choice, and that was to enter the Indian Service. Hence, I was given orders to go to Elbowoods, North Dakota. I arrived in Elbowoods, North Dakota in August of 1951, and everything was beginning to be closed down. And we planned what we were going to do with our health service. The reservation was going to be, after the flooding, it was going to be separated into 5 different, what they call segments. We're planning to have clinics in each one of the segments. One of the interesting things was that few months that well, it was actually amounted to a year that I was in Elbowoods. One of the interesting things was planning and going around the reservation to the different segments, which we could reach very easily before the water came because of the Elbowwood bridge, this bridge that eventually was taken piece by piece to Newtown. I remember using that bridge very, yes I do, because our town from Elbowoods, where we went to do most of our shopping, was Halliday. It was only 12 miles south of Elbowoods. North of Elbowoods was Partial, which was further. And, but the reservation was held together by that bridge, so to speak. About half the people lived in the south part, and about half the people lived in the north part.
Opening dedication ceremonies were held between June 14th and 17th for the new bridge. The name Forebears was chosen, with the northern half of the bridge being dedicated to the Hidatsa chief Forebears, and the southern half of the bridge being dedicated to the Mandan chief Forebears.
Yeah, when this went on, where the whole bunch went across. They went across the bridge, then we turned around. And then they said, go back, go back to the other side. And the celebration was on this side, and there was one celebration on the other side. But we belong on this south side, so we had to come back, see. Oh, that Elbowoods side had their celebration, see, the people that was from Elbowoods, and they had a big celebration right in their own place. And we had ours at Crowsarts. Camping was all around, and then they had a rodeo grounds, and my dad was director for the rodeo. So he had to be busy over there too. And the first time I went on a bridge with my horse, the horse I rode, I thought she was tame, the mare. And I rode her the first day, and we were over there. Here she kept rearing up, way back like that, and she'd drop herself, Horse, see, that was my horse. And I couldn't make her quit doing that, She just reared up. So finally a man came, one of the Indian guys, and he talked Indian to me, and he said, you better get off. He said, your horse is acting up. He said, he might buck you off. He said, I said, no, I know. I said, I'm all right, but I'll get off if you want me to. I said, so I got off.
There were so many people you couldn't hardly walk. I remember Braden Cooper and I was working up at my uncle Carl Tasham. And by golly, I told Carl, I said, you ran the opening of the bridge, I said, well, I ain't gonna miss that. So he said, I'll take you down there. So he was the whole family, Carl's whole family at that time went down. Oh, you should have seen the mob. There was old Model Ts. I forget now. I think it was Johnny. Johnny only counted the Model Ts. Something like that never happened, in the whole country at that time. Oh, it was, I'll tell you. There was cars from, I forget now, Johnny had license numbers from Washington, D.C. and all over.
Like I say, you could always cross over on the Forebears Bridge. It was just a short bridge then. It wasn't a real huge bridge. And in the winter, people drove across on the ice, or went across on horseback. And so the river itself was not a big barrier, but today Lake Sacagawea is a huge barrier.